Hello, hello. I am joined here today by the wonderful Charlotte Armitage, who is a psychologist and a psychotherapist and founder of Outsourced Psych. And today we are going to be talking about how we reintegrate back into society, back into the workplace, and how do we calm our anxiety. I know that many of us have been struggling over the last few months. It's been tough. Charlotte and I have just been sharing our war stories about how we're feeling about it all. But first of all, Charlotte, thank you so much for joining us today. It's lovely to see your face.
Yeah, and thank you for having me.
Lovely. So tell us, a lot of people are feeling very anxious about what's happening in the world right now. We think, oh, the lockdown's finished, great. But then we've got this kind of anxiety of going back into work, or the etiquette of wearing masks, not to wear a mask. How do we feel? How do we manage our anxiety right now?
I think you're right about the anxiety there, as well as as we reintegrate. I think there's been this idea, hasn't there, that lockdowns are ending. Oh, and it's over. Yeah. I think as probably most people are finding this, as we start to go out and integrate, we start to realise that the world's actually really not what we were expecting. And managing our expectations is going to be one of the biggest factors with helping with our anxiety. Is if we're expecting things to be different rather than expecting them to be the same, it won't be as anxiety provoking because it won't be so unusual. And that's difficult, isn't it, to kind of imagine what it's going to be like when we haven't actually been out and seen what it's like out there. But it's very different. And I think with what you just said with the masks, I think that on its own brings with it quite a lot of distress. There's so many different factors involved with wearing a mask, just things like, the claustrophobia. Some people might feel unsafe because they can't read people. We've obviously been taught, haven't we? We've all subconsciously, and this is how we've always been in our lives, is we learn who people are and how we feel about them, and are they safe? Can we approach? Are we all right around them? By reading them, and we read them by reading their faces. It's just something that we just do innately. And now we can't do that because we can't see the face. So there's a lot of communication that's been lost. And, for us, obviously, we do a lot of work with people with disabilities. And I do think people who have disabilities are going to struggle with communication. There's going to have to be something there as well. But my biggest sort of point there would be that we need to manage our expectations of what we're going out there and what to expect of ourselves and what to expect of others, because people aren't just going to go, lockdown's over, everything's all right now, let's get back to normal. It won't be like that. Everyone's going to have their own anxieties about the situation that we all don't know about each other yet. So some people might have had a great time in lockdown and they might be fine, and they might come out of it psychologically resilient and well rested and be happy to go along and might not be bothered, whereas other people might be very anxious. They might have had existing anxieties which are heightened in this situation now, and they might not have been expecting that. So people might be behaving in an odd way, so what we would consider odd to ourselves. So we need to be compassionate, I suppose, and respectful of that. And it is going to be an adjustment. It's going to be an adjustment that over time we're going to get more used to, I think, as time goes on and we get used to the differences in how people are behaving, what the expectations are of us in these social situations. We'll eventually get used to it because we're humans, so we are an adaptable species. We will get used to it eventually, but it'll take time. And it's okay if there's a level of anxiety, because it's not irrational, is it? It's rational anxiety. It's a natural response to a world that feels very unpredictable and unstable. And actually, that's quite normal. It's quite normal to feel like that.
Yeah. So the first thing is managing your expectations, that it's not just going to go back to normal, and it's okay that you feel anxious. So it's okay to feel anxious. It's okay to be not okay. And it's okay that if people are behaving oddly around you, is to have some compassion for others, because you don't know what they're going through or what they've gone through the last 3 months. So how do we manage that? How do we navigate this with it? Are there any great tools that you can suggest that we can try or use to kind of, before we go out the door, or in the morning or the evening? I mean, at the moment I'm meditating, I'm exercises, I'm trying to do all the things that, you know, I've got all of these, as editor of Psychologies, I've got all of these amazing tools that I can use, and it means nothing if I don't use them. And even doing all the things that I'm doing, the breathing and the exercising and the meditating, I still sometimes feel really wobbly. So what can you recommend for people to kind of create that will, well, at least that I've got a sense of control of, oh, well, this is what I can do. What do you suggest?
I think that's the word there is control. And I think anxiety comes out of this idea that the world is quite unstable and unpredictable, and it is. So we can't change that. And doing all, like, so you're saying you're doing all the techniques, the meditation and whatnot, but actually you still feel anxious. Well, I guess we do, because that's the world that we have out there. Being compassionate with ourselves about the fact that we're feeling anxious. There are lots of techniques that people can do if they're anxious, but it depends on the levels of anxiety, really. I mean, how there's I mean, you could have, it could be off the chart where you just don't even want to leave the house and interact or speak to people, or it could just be I suppose a slight fear where you're a bit kind of apprehensive and cautious. It depends on, you know, the severity of the anxiety, but there's lots of mindfulness tools and techniques. They call them grounding techniques. So things like that, which can pull you out of your anxious mind. If you're very panicked and your brain starts functioning in a different way, really, your prefrontal cortex shuts off and your limbic system it prepares you for action, because essentially your brain has sensed a threat. So that's why we feel anxiety in our body and heart racing and whatnot. So if you get to that point, doing grounding exercises and tools, that's going to be really helpful. And normally wouldn't say if someone's really anxious with situations to necessarily remove themselves, because actually that's just maintaining that behavior. But given that this is it's a reaction to an environment which feels unusual, it maybe is about doing a graded exposure, so gently getting used to that environment. So instead of, say, if you've been working from home for last 3 months, instead of just suddenly going right straight back in the office now 9 to 5 every single day around lots of people, if it's too hard and it's too difficult, open and honest communication, always the biggest and best way of dealing with things, I think. Speak to your bosses, your line managers, and just say, I'm actually really struggling with this environment now. I've got used to being at home. I feel apprehensive. I feel fearful. I'm uncomfortable with touching the pens. I'm uncomfortable with door handles, whatever it might be. And just speak to your boss and say, can I work from home 2 or 3 days a week? Have that conversation. And I'm hoping that employers are going to be aware that people are going to need time to adjust, and actually trying to force people into a situation what they're not comfortable in. It's not going to help with anybody's productivity. People are going to just be too distressed and upset. And even if that's not that obvious distress and upset, it can be underlying, and it can be there kind of distracting you from everything that you're doing. So I think being honest about what your needs are and communicating that, not just only at work, but at home as well, to the people around you. And I said this all throughout lockdown, communicate with your families. And if all of a sudden people have been shoved together and 24/7, which is so unusual, but it's okay to say, look, I need half an hour on my own. I want to be in the room on my own. Don't want to talk to anybody. It's nothing against you. I still love you. But I just need my time. And it's true, isn't it? And it's about feeling comfortable enough and knowing yourself well enough to recognize what it is that's making you feel uncomfortable. Because sometimes we feel uncomfortable and we don't know why. But recognizing what it is within yourself, why am I feeling uncomfortable, and what can I do to alleviate that distress? So setting your boundaries as to what you are comfortable with and what you aren't, and communicating that with the people around you. So that's your family, your friends, your employers. That's absolutely fine. I mean, to be honest, I went to pick up a prescription the other day, and I didn't want to hold the pen. I just didn't, you know, and I just said, I'm really sorry, I don't want to pick up the pen. You know, and it's not something I would have said before. Yes. But, and I did think they're going to think you know, a real nightmare for being like that. But I just, you know, I just thought, I'm not comfortable with it. I don't want to do it. So people are going to be different. And I hadn't realized even in myself, these different kind of I suppose, these different considerations that I'd have, like not wanting to touch hand pumps and things like that as this lockdown is lifting. But because we've been made so aware of germs and hand washing, and it's been drilled into us, and I think, you know, some people have already been quite conscious of this anyway for a long time, but it seems to, it's for me, it's definitely exacerbated any kind of like existing anxieties, and I think it has for a lot of people. And it will be a case of like that readjustment, but being honest at the same time, not forcing yourself to do things that you don't want to do, and letting people know what you're comfortable with, so that they can hopefully readjust and support you whilst you're moving out of this position and period. But it goes, I think, sorry Susan,
the part of the thing as well is making all of those decisions is quite exhausting.
Say that again, sorry.
It's quite exhausting making all those decisions around the pump or this, or we having a crisp and nachos, you know, sharing a thing, oh, you know, all of that, all of a sudden you're like, oh.
It is. Anxiety is exhausting. So whatever that anxiety might be, whether it's claustrophobia, whether it's to do with germs, however that might manifest in you, it's a really exhausting process to go through psychologically, because there's a level of your psychological attention that is always being utilized on this thing that you're trying to say avoid. So can I touch this? Can I do that? How far can I stand? You know, and now we've got to utilize all these extra resources to remind ourselves, don't stand too close to that person. Make sure you've done your hand gel, put your gloves on. Oh, you can't go in there without a mask on, you know, and it's not just that, it's then we have to try and work. We've all do it on a very, very innate subconscious level. We are all working people out all the time around us. It's not on a conscious level. We just do it because that's how we survive. You know, we make sure, you know, if we start to see someone standing pointing a gun at us, we know we probably need to move, you know. Whereas we can tell when people smile, it makes us feel safe because it makes us feel comfortable. It's all those sorts of things. But now we've got this extra pressure of, oh, I can't see your face, so how can I work out what's really going on here? So even though we might not be really consciously aware of it, all of these additional processes psychologically that we're expected to do now are going to be tiring. So I wouldn't be surprised if you find yourself more overwhelmed, more exhausted and more tired as you start reintegrating back into this new normal. It's a whole new change of life. You know, it is. It's a lot to adjust to in a short space of time. And it's not just this adjustment, is it? It's the huge adjustment that happened back in March. We had this huge adjustment. We've slowly got used to that, and now we're being told we need to readjust again. So it's another adjustment which impacts our relationships, our work life, our personal life, our social life, our psychological and mental well-being. It affects everything. It's huge, which is why I say that it's for people to say, oh, I need to eradicate the anxiety, or I'm sleeping more, or the behaviours are changing. That's okay. We would expect that. With these amount of changes, you would expect your behaviour to change in some way.
And I suppose there's a piece about upping your self-care to a point where you're, you know, again, you know, for me, just to kind of keep the show on the road right now, I'm sleeping a lot. I'm drinking lots of water. I'm looking after myself at quite a high level, because without that, I'm not quite sure how I would be feeling. Let's talk about employers, because we've got a lot of people. Boris is telling us all to get back to work, go back into the office. What advice? Because I know you're a business psychologist and you run Outsourced Psych for businesses. What advice are you giving to employers about how they can support their employees? What can they do to be supporting us?
I think return to work interviews are absolute necessity. Need to find out where each of your employees is at the moment psychologically. Where are they? Have people had a distressing time at home? Have they been unwell? Have they been affected by, it's not just COVID, but all the other things like Black Lives Matter movement? There's all these other things that have been going on, all these huge changes. How have they been affected, and what is it that individual wants? Are they happy to come back to work? Do they want to work from home? And an employer who is appreciative of these challenges and difficulties that people are going through, and flexible with that, really. They need a flexible approach, but we need to be open and be able to communicate with our employers what it is that we think that we need in order to feel safe coming back in the environment. I honestly think that being open and communicating and being respectful of each other and the needs and the wants of the people around us is going to be the key to getting out of this situation in a in a healthy way that isn't too distressing. I know that the government are saying, oh, everyone's got to go back to work, but everyone has their own motivations for the things that they're saying, don't they? And I think that each individual, we've just got to look after our well-being. Like you say, you're doing your self-care. Everyone needs to practice their own self-care, and that is also about setting your boundaries and making quite difficult decisions about, do I want to be going back to work full-time? Do I want to work from an office? What do I need from my employer when I'm there? And can I communicate this to my boss? Do I feel it I'm able to? And if not, can I communicate it to a HR person or somebody else who's going to help? So it's going to be that. It's going to be, the flexible approach is going to be what's going to be the most important thing, getting people back to work, really.
I mean, what I'm hearing is it's first of all acknowledging our anxiety. It's normal to be anxious, but also there's a piece about what do you want going forward, and to be able to identify how you want your new normal to look, and then to have an open, honest conversation with your employer and to say, okay, this is what I'd like, what I want, and then that's a place to start. And again, but it feels to me that it feels like it's about control, that it's not that you're out, that this whole thing is out of control, but you can take, you can have agency in these decisions that are being made, and that they can really help you. And also, we talked about self-care, but also that is something that we do have control of. So, looking at all the things that you can control in this situation. We can't control what's happening out there, but we can control what's happening, to an extent, because I think anxiety kind of can hijack us to an extent.
It does.
Yeah, but what we can do is try and keep the self-care to a level of understanding, like you would. I try and treat myself like a small child, who needs lots of hair stroking. When I come back and I think, oh, I think I'll just go for a nap. When I come back from work or whatever, so I can look after myself in a way that perhaps I've never looked after myself before. Charlotte, thank you so much for your wisdom today.
Thank
this
you.
Is lovely Charlotte Whittaker, psychologist and a psychotherapist, who is the founder of Outsourced Psych. So if you do need any advice around how to get back out there for employers, then do get in touch with Charlotte. All her details are below. Thank you so much, Charlotte, and have a really great day. Lots of love. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.